Russia is sticking with the strategy it's come up with for 2025 in the wake of its ground offensives becoming less and less effective. Airstrikes using more missiles and drones than ever before have been raining down on Ukraine, but toward the end of September, Russia took it all a step too far. Rather than absorb the strikes and carry on defending its own territory, Ukraine decided to hit back. Ukraine's revenge was savage and ruthless, leaving one of Russia's border cities suffering from massive blackouts. That city is Belgorod. And on September 29th, Euromaidan Press reported that Ukraine had hit that city hard. We'll cover the details of what Ukraine took out soon, but here are the basics. Ukraine used long-range weapons, potentially not its own, to strike a pair of critical energy facilities in Belgorod. One of these facilities was the city's thermal power station, with the other being its electrical substation. Both are vital for keeping Belgorod's citizens supplied with power. You can guess what the results of Ukraine's revenge strike were from there. Blackouts have affected various parts of the city, according to Euromaidan Press reports. The strike has also been confirmed by the Belgorod regional governor, Vyacheslav Gladkov, the Kyiv Post reports. According to the outlet, Gladkov released a statement claiming that enemy missiles had struck a Belgorod power station. While Gladkov mentioned the widespread blackouts, he was much keener to emphasize that Ukraine's attack had forced hospitals and police stations to operate using backup generators. Power outages had also limited the delivery of water to some of Belgorod's citizens, which again shows Gladkov trying to highlight the impact of Ukraine's strike on civilians. This statement tells us a lot about how Russia reacts to Ukraine's strikes. We've heard all the drone debris excuses that Russia likes to deliver whenever one of Ukraine's long-range drones hits its mark. But beyond this excuse, Russia will usually deny the success of Ukraine's strikes. So why is it confirming the Belgorod attack? We just hinted at the answer. The attack has affected Russian civilians. None have been injured or killed, at least not based on reports available at the time of creating this video. But because Russian citizens were deprived of power and in some cases water, Russia is publicizing this strike to make Ukraine seem like terrorists. This isn't conjecture, it's propaganda. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the Russian Federation maintains an online list of what it calls the terrorist crimes committed by the Kyiv regime. The document contains a long explanation of what Russia deems a terrorist act, though it basically boils down to Ukraine striking back after Russia has pounded Ukrainian cities with drones, bombs, and missiles. Ukraine isn't supposed to hit back, but when it does, and when those strikes in any way affect civilians, Russia sees an opportunity to paint Ukraine as the bad guys in a conflict that Russia started. And it does this, as is the case with the Belgorod strike, even when no civilians are killed by Ukraine's attacks. It's a transparent attempt to influence the narrative of the war. Almost everybody outside of Russia sees through it. So if Ukraine didn't strike civilians, as Russia has done so often throughout the Ukraine war, what did it hit in Belgorod? The Kyiv Post says that geolocated footage of Ukraine's strike shows that it scores at least 5 direct hits on a facility named TETS-4. Responsible for generating electricity, this facility burst into flames as a result of Ukraine's attack. Debris and explosions also damaged several key components of the facility, including fuel reservoirs and a fuel supply system, turbines, and the electrical substation we mentioned earlier in the video. More details come from Euromaidan Press, which says the facility Ukraine struck was rebuilt in 2007, allowing the installation of a modern gas turbine that gives TETS-4 a power output of gigacalories per hour. That's enough for the plant to provide for all of the thermal energy needs of Belgorod's central and northern districts, which Euromaidan Press says accounts for 36.3% of the city's total needs. This wasn't any old plant that Ukraine just took out. It was a plant that served over a third of a Russian city that is right on Ukraine's border. There's also footage of the strikes as they took place, shared by the Canal 13 YouTube channel. In a series of videos, the outlet shows various angles of the damaged power plant, many of which showcase massive black plumes of smoke streaming into the sky. On a few occasions, we see where the smoke is coming from, huge fires inside TETS-4 that Russia has confirmed were caused by a Ukrainian attack. And yet more confirmation of Ukraine's success comes from the Astra Telegram channel, which shares images of power outage reports making the rounds in Belgorod. Those images are accompanied by a statement confirming the previously mentioned water supply and power outage issues. Even if Russia wanted to deny what happened on the evening of September 27th and into 28th, the strike was too massive. The effects were felt by hundreds, if not thousands, of Belgorod citizens who suddenly found themselves without power and, in some cases, water. This wasn't something that Russia could hide, and to make matters worse, this strike seems like it was too big to have been conducted by Ukraine's drones. Another weapon was used, a weapon that Ukraine hasn't been able to use for a long time. But we'll come back to that later in the video. For now, it's important to point out that Ukraine didn't just randomly decide to hit Belgorod. This strike was payback for something Russia had just done hours before, and it was intended as a message delivered straight to Vladimir Putin. If you hit Ukraine's cities, Ukraine will hit Russian cities even harder. Just hours before Ukraine sent its weapons flying into Belgorod, Russia was again launching one of the many massive missile and drone strikes it's used throughout 2025 against Ukraine. The Kyiv Independent reported the main details on September 28th, noting that a massive drone attack lasting for almost 12 hours had hit multiple regions of Ukraine. Using nearly 500 drones and over 40 missiles, Russia had targeted cities up to and including the Ukrainian capital of Kyiv, killing at least 4 people and injuring a further 70 in the process. One of the dead was a 12-year-old girl. The outlet adds that Russia's missiles and drones damaged or destroyed 20 individual locations, including a 5-story building in Kyiv. In total, 7 of Kyiv's districts had endured damage. We have details about how Russia managed to carry out the attack too. The Kyiv Independent says that Russia used 5 Tu-95 bombers in the strike, all of which took off from Olenia airfield in Murmansk at about 1:45 a.m. local time. About 45 minutes later, Russia also launched MiG-31K bombers, leading to aerial alerts being posted across Ukraine. More Tu-95s were launched from the Engels airbase, meaning Russia was clearly trying to hit Ukraine from as many angles as possible. It succeeded. Euromaidan Press provides more details, noting that Russia also targeted the Zaporizhia, Sumy, and Khmelnytsky oblasts with its overnight strike. In all cases, some of Russia's missiles and drones broke through Ukraine's air defenses, predominantly hitting residential buildings and vehicles in the process. Russia used Caliber, Kh-101 and Kh-55 cruise missiles in the attack, Euromaidan Press says. It also launched hundreds of its Gerbera, Shahid-type Geran and decoy drones. What we see here is the clear contrast between Ukraine's airstrikes and those being conducted by Russia. Though Ukraine took out a Belgorod power station, that is a legitimate military target. Belgorod is on Ukraine's border, which also makes it a potential target for a Ukrainian incursion, much like the one we saw in Kursk in August 2024. Most importantly, no civilians were harmed in the Belgorod strike. If there were any hurt civilians, Russia would let the world know about it so it could feed its Ukraine are terrorists narrative even more. But really, it's Russia that's acting like a terrorist nation. Its September 28th airstrike has killed Ukrainian civilians, like so many of Russia's airstrikes and ground assaults before it. According to Statista, statistics provided by the UN Human Rights Office say that Russia's invasion of Ukraine has caused 13,883 civilian deaths, along with 35,548 injuries as of July 31st, 2025. 726 children have been killed in these attacks, and now more after Russia's September 28th strike, with a further 2,234 of the injured also being children. Russia strikes indiscriminately. Its missiles and drones aren't aimed at military targets. They're sent into Ukraine to wreak havoc, cause terror, and kill civilians. That's the difference in the airstrikes we see from both sides. Ukraine is precise. Dangerous, though always in the context of hitting legitimate targets that damage Putin's war machine. It's not the terrorist that Russia tries to claim Ukraine to be. Frankly, Russia is hypocritical whenever it tries to tar Ukraine with a terrorist brush, considering the substantial impact on civilians that Russia's attacks have had. After all, Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky had delivered a stark warning to Russia just a day before Putin ordered hundreds of drones and dozens of missiles to strike Ukrainian territory. If they threaten blackouts, for example, in the capital of Ukraine, then they should know in the Kremlin that there will be a blackout in the capital of Russia, Zelensky had roared during a Kyiv briefing on September 27th. Granted, Ukraine only partially delivered on its promise. It caused mass blackouts in Belgorod rather than Moscow. But even that could feed back into the message Ukraine sent with this attack, that it could strike Russia just as hard as Russia hits Ukraine. Today it was Belgorod, Ukraine seems to be implying. If Russia keeps on attacking Kyiv, it may be Moscow's turn to experience the wrath of Ukrainian missiles. However, perhaps calling them Ukraine's missiles is a misnomer. And that brings us back to something we mentioned earlier in the video. To conduct its Belgorod strike, Ukraine decided not to use the long-range drones it had used in so many of its oil refinery strikes during August and September. Those drones have enough firepower to disrupt refineries enough to cause shutdowns, but they don't hit hard enough to take out an entire power station. Ukraine needed missiles for Belgorod, and it wasn't missiles that Ukraine manufactured itself that it used for the strike. It was US-made missiles. The Kyiv Post says that the footage and imagery captured of the explosions at Tets 4 suggests that Ukraine used the US-made M31 GMLRS, or ground-launched small-diameter bomb, to do the damage in Belgorod. Though technically classified as an artillery rocket, the M31 is a precision-guided weapon that acts in much the same way as a long-range missile. It also packs a 200-pound high-explosive warhead and is capable of traveling up to 100 miles to strike its target. Ukraine certainly has the launch platforms needed to send the M31s Russia's way. The M31 can be fired from both the HIMARS launcher, of which Ukraine had about 40 as of May 2025, and the M270 multiple launch rocket system, which Ukraine is also believed to have. The specific version of the M31 used, presuming it was the precision-guided bomb that hit Belgorod so many times, is also a new version, the Kyiv Post reports. The M31s Ukraine received in the past were short-range munitions that, though useful and powerful, wouldn't have been able to strike so deep into Russian territory. Now, Ukraine has M31s that can hit Belgorod and, based on their range, could also do some serious damage in Kursk. This alone shouldn't be massive news. We know that Ukraine has plenty of US-made weapons capable of striking Russian territory, and we also know that Ukraine received permission to use those weapons in a limited capacity against Russian targets from former President Joe Biden back in November 2024. However, a lot has changed since November, as Biden has left office and Donald Trump is now president. Under Trump, a small, though very relevant change had occurred that made it much more difficult for Ukraine to carry out these types of strikes we just saw in Belgorod. The Wall Street Journal, or WSJ, explained what was happening in August. In an exclusive article, the WSJ explained that several unnamed officials had confirmed to it that the US had a new policy in place that blocked Ukraine from using American-made weapons in Russian territory. The policy had been in place for 4 months before the article's publication, and it took the form of an approval process. To fire any American missile or bomb at Russia, Ukraine had to go through a review mechanism that gives the US Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth final say on whether Ukraine can use US-made munitions inside Russia or not. For months, the Pentagon, under Hegseth's leadership, had been saying no to Ukraine. That's why we hadn't been hearing any stories about Ukraine using ATACMS missiles or the M31 GMLRS used in Belgorod against Russia. The US wouldn't allow it, and Ukraine was essentially banned from hitting Russia with anything other than weapons that it made domestically. With all of this context, Ukraine's Belgorod strike goes from being an extremely effective attack to one that has long-term ramifications for the entire war. This wasn't any old strike. It was an aerial attack conducted using American-made weapons, which can mean only one thing. The US is once again giving Ukraine the okay to use its weapons to hit Russia. There were hints that this was coming just a couple of days before Ukraine pulled off its latest attack. On September 26th, The Independent reported that Trump had created what could end up being a potentially huge policy change. As The Independent put it, President Donald Trump reportedly told Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky that he was open to lifting certain restrictions on the use of certain US-made weapons, signaling a potentially huge change in policy. Apparently, this turnaround came when Zelensky and Trump met at the United Nations General Assembly a few days prior. Trump delivered a speech at that assembly in which he criticized Putin for his bad leadership. Now the US is allowing Ukraine to turn that criticism into action against Russia's leader. The Independent also reports that Zelensky asked Trump to lift the ban on using ATACMS missiles against Russia. Plus, Ukraine's leader inquired about the possibility of the US providing Ukraine with Tomahawk cruise missiles, some of which have ranges of up to 1,500 miles. The US is considering this latter request, The Independent says. As for the former, we don't know if Ukraine can use ATACMS in Russia. But thanks to Belgorod, we know that it can now use the M31. Permission has been granted, and Ukraine delivering payback against Russia for one of Putin's biggest airstrikes of the war so far seems to be the perfect way to deliver the message to Russia that the US is back on board. Russia isn't happy about any of this. After news broke that the US is considering supplying Tomahawk missiles to Ukraine, Russia's propagandists went into overdrive. Among them was Dmitry Peskov, who so often says things that Putin wants to say. The Kremlin mouthpiece responded to US Vice President J.D. Vance's suggestion that Tomahawks could head to Ukraine with a string of questions. The question is this: who can launch these missiles? Peskov asked. Can only Ukrainians launch them, or do American soldiers have to do that? Who is determining the targets of these missiles, the American side or the Ukrainians themselves? Andrei Kotopolov, who leads the Kremlin's Defense Committee, was much blunter in his assessment. He claimed that any hint of US military specialists helping Ukraine to launch Tomahawks at Russia would make the US a target. And no one will protect them, not Trump, not Kellogg, nor anyone else, Kotopolov threatened. Peskov added that a very in-depth analysis of American involvement needs to take place, and that the use of Tomahawks would represent an escalation of the Ukraine conflict. Reading between the lines, we can draw an obvious conclusion from these responses. Russia is scared, and it should be. We mentioned that Tomahawks have a maximum range of 1,500 miles earlier in the video. That's more than far enough for Ukraine to use them in deep strikes into the heart of Moscow, which would also allow Zelensky to fully deliver on his promise he made on September 27th. And now, assuming it was indeed M31s used against Belgorod, Russia has just seen the US is again happy for Ukraine to start using American-made weapons on Russian territory. Simply put, there's only one reason why the US would provide Tomahawks to Ukraine. It's all about long-range strikes. Ukraine knows it, the US knows it, and Russia knows precisely how much damage these terrifying missiles could do against targets deep inside Russia that Ukraine's previous drone strikes have already proven are poorly guarded against attacks from the air. Losing power in Belgorod already hurts Russia. But what Ukraine just achieved with this strike shows us that the US is on the verge of conducting a U-turn that Putin never saw coming. What we see here is the final manifestation of Trump's growing frustration with Putin. Ever since he took office, Trump has been pushing for peace, or at least a ceasefire in Ukraine. He's almost come close a few times too. Through it all, Putin has been stringing Trump along with claims that he wants peace, which are then swiftly followed by yet more devastating airstrikes and grinding ground assaults against Ukraine. The thread of Trump's patience was already wearing thin. On September 12th, Reuters reported that fact, noting that Trump had said as much when asked about his patience with Putin. "Yeah, it's sort of running out and running out fast," Reuters reports Trump as saying during an interview with Fox News. During that interview, Trump hinted at more sanctions being used to hit Russia where it hurts economically. But fast forward a couple of weeks, and we now have rumors of the US sending Tomahawks to Ukraine, and what appears to be the lifting of restrictions on Ukraine's use of American-made weapons inside Russia. The thin thread has snapped, and Belgorod now burns because Putin couldn't help but order yet another drone and missile strike against Ukraine. When US-made F-16s started arriving in Ukraine in August 2024, the war Russia started took a turn. The F-16s weren't silver bullets, but they gave Ukraine options, especially when it came to defending against Russia's rampant missile and drone attacks. In time, and as more F-16s arrived, Ukraine also began using its Western jets to conduct strikes against Russian positions. Russia knows that Western jets are capable of causing serious damage to its troops in Ukraine, and now another one is set to arrive in Ukraine. Vladimir Putin can't believe what Sweden just gave Ukraine, as Gripen fighter jets are soon going to start terrorizing Russia's troops. On September 29th, the Kyiv Post reported that Ukraine's Deputy Defense Minister, Lieutenant General Ivan Havrilyuk, had confirmed that the arrival of Swedish-made Gripen fighter jets in Ukraine was imminent. Havrilyuk didn't make any sort of grandiose statement about the arrival of these jets. Instead, he subtly revealed that a reporter from the BBC Ukrainian edition was on the right track with the questions that the reporter was asking about Ukraine's incoming fighter jets. Caginess was the order of Havrilyuk's day during that interview. The BBC reporter first asked him the key questions, which were when the new Western fighter jets would arrive in Ukraine and how many it would be getting. Havrilyuk provided a bit of a non-answer to the question, stating, "Come on, when you see them in the air over Ukraine, then you will understand." This was an interesting response that suggests Havrilyuk doesn't want to give too much away when it comes to what Ukraine has prepared for Russia. That makes sense. The more Russia knows, the less effective Ukraine's use of these fighter jets may be, especially if Russia has defenses it can mount against them. However, the BBC reporter kept subtly pushing after Havrilyuk confirmed that the new jets are expected soon. By expected, the reporter asked, did Ukraine's Deputy Defense Minister mean that Ukraine will be getting the F-16, the French-made Mirage, the Gripen, or in a perfect world, all of them? Havrilyuk's response suggests that it's the latter, as all he told the reporter was, "Practically, you named the nomenclature correctly, but I won't go into detail about when, what, which one." It's the part about naming the nomenclature correctly that the Kyiv Post says requires our attention. The outlet says that pretty much equates to Havrilyuk confirming that the reporter had named the correct list of incoming fighter jets in his question, and seeing that the Gripen was part of that list, that could only mean one thing: Sweden's fighter jet is heading to Ukraine. This has been a long time coming, though not for the reasons that you might think. Gripens haven't arrived in Ukraine before, not because Sweden didn't want to provide them, but due to Ukraine saying no when they were first offered. Sweden first suggested supplying some of its Gripens back in 2024. Aerospace Global News reports. After an assessment, Ukraine had to say no because it was in the midst of preparing for the arrival of the F-16. This wasn't a case of Ukraine not wanting the Gripens. Rather, Ukraine knew it already had its hands full with the then new F-16 program and the training its pilots needed to go through to be able to fly their new US-made jets properly. Adding another fighter jet into the mix would have created complications. It was better to complete the F-16 program first and then focus on the Gripens later. Sweden's former Minister of Foreign Affairs, Tobias Billström, confirmed this was the case at the time. Ukraine came to the conclusion that having two fighter systems at the same time, both F-16 and Gripen, is too much, Billström said. He said that the decision made sense in the light of the F-16 offers Ukraine had received. We must understand that Ukraine was given the opportunity to receive F-16 fighters, of which, of course, there are more in the NATO family. It was logical that Ukraine would want to focus on training its pilots to use a jet that offers a steadier supply of airframes than the Gripen. Sweden responded well. Rather than taking the rejection to heart, it said that it would find other ways to help Ukraine by providing other weapons and military aid. Over a year has passed since this rejection. Ukraine has been flying the F-16 since August 2024, and it's fair to say that it's gotten used to its American airframe by now. By January 2025, a Ukrainian pilot managed to break the world record for the number of cruise missiles shot down during a single F-16 sortie, taking out 6 in one sitting. The F-16 program, at least on the pilot education side, is now complete, which means Ukraine is finally able to change its answer about the Gripen. Now, it's saying yes. That yes came in September, as discussions had opened between Ukraine and its European partners regarding several jets. The Kyiv Post reported on these discussions on September 22nd, noting that the focus seemed to be on the Eurofighter Typhoon jet. However, it also noted that Ukraine's defense minister Rustem Umerov had confirmed that there were commitments or consultations for the Gripen ongoing. Though a similarly cagey response to the Gripen question as that provided by his deputy, Umerov's confirmation that commitments were in place was big. Sweden can't make a commitment if Ukraine refuses to take the Gripens it's offering off its hands. The fact that a commitment has been made confirms that Ukraine has said yes and that the Gripen is on its way. And Ukraine will be happy to have this jet in its arsenal. The Gripen had been making headlines just days before Havriliuk confirmed that the jets are on the list of those that are coming to Ukraine. On September 26th, Euromaidan Press reported that Russia was once again pulling its recent trick of sending its fighter jets to within touching distance of NATO airspace. This time it was the Baltic state of Lithuania that Russia targeted. 5 of Russia's jets approached Lithuania's airspace in what was a move intended to both serve as a threat and a provocation to NATO. The 5-jet formation included a trio of MiG-31s, much like the MiG-31s Russia sent into Estonia's airspace earlier in September. Only this time, the MiGs were accompanied by an Su-30 and an Su-35. The threat was getting bigger. But Russia didn't dare risk sending the jets into Lithuania's airspace. Russia has already been warned by Poland that the next Russian jet that enters NATO airspace is going to be shot down. NATO itself appears to have confirmed this is the case, as you can find out by watching our video covering the new NATO threat. So rather than risk the wrath of NATO, Putin sent his jets to the outskirts of Lithuania. We're telling you all of this because, as you've likely already concluded, NATO had to respond to Russia and its fighter jet games. And it did so by sending in the very airframe that Ukraine now says it's on the verge of receiving from Sweden. The NATO air policing mission operating in Lithuania sent Gripens provided by Hungary to identify Russia's fighter jets and escort them away from Lithuania. That's a vote of confidence in the Swedish jets. If NATO didn't think they were up for the job of dealing with Russia's fighters, it would have sent something else. It didn't. Gripens confronted Russia during its latest aerial incursions, and Gripens succeeded in sending the Russian jets packing. And now this exact jet is the one that's soon going to be arriving in Ukraine. Of course, this leads us to the obvious question of what exactly Ukraine is getting. We don't have all of the answers to this question. Havriliuk provided no more details. We don't know which version of the Gripen Ukraine is set to receive, nor do we know how many of these Swedish jets are en route to the country. We do know that there's already a relationship between the Ukrainian and Swedish air forces, as May saw Ukraine's Ministry of Defense confirm that it was going to receive Saab's help to upgrade some of its Soviet-era jets. Saab is the maker of the Gripen, so there's a chance that these upgrades were accompanied by a fair amount of teaching about what the Gripen is capable of. Who knows? Ukraine's Soviet-era jets may even now have some Gripen components installed in them following Saab's upgrades. Still, even though we don't know the answers to what many would consider the most important questions when it comes to Ukraine's incoming Gripens, what we can tell you is that the jet is among the most capable that Europe has to offer. Army Recognition offers the basic specifications, noting that the Gripen is a single-engine, multi-role fighter that was specifically designed to meet both current and future threats. What Russia just sent close to Lithuania is a current threat. With Gripens in its arsenal, Ukraine should theoretically be capable of dealing with anything that Russia comes up with in the near future. Though the Gripen has many intelligent design features, its advanced aerodynamic layout may be the highlight. The aircraft uses a combined close-coupled canard with both delta configuration and a triplex, along with a digital flight control system that gives the Gripen immense aerial agility. This is a jet designed to come out on top in dogfights as much as it's designed to deliver munitions to threats on the ground. Speaking of munitions, the Gripen is among the most versatile jets around. If you can name a NATO-compatible missile or bomb designed for fighter jets, the odds are high that the Gripen is compatible with it. That's huge for Ukraine, as it means that almost all of the munitions it's receiving from its European and American partners are usable, ensuring it can configure its incoming Gripens to whatever is needed for the operation at hand. Having said all of that, a standard Gripen loadout includes AIM-9, IRIS-T, AIM-120, and Skyflash missiles. It can also be equipped with Mark 82 bombs, BK-90 cluster bombs, GBU-12s, and an anti-ship missile called the RBS-15F. The jet's loadout is completed by a 27mm Mauser high-energy gun that uses automated radar guidance to ensure a pilot can lock onto a target easily. This is not a jet with which Russia's pilots want to tangle. Beyond that, the Gripen can hit a top speed of 2,200 km/h, That's equivalent to 1,367 miles per hour, or about Mach 1.8. So not only is the Gripen agile, but it's very fast. The jet's range is 3,000 kilometers or 1,864 miles, and there are versions made that can be crewed by 1 or 2 people. Again, we don't know which of these versions Ukraine will be getting, so we won't speculate in that department. Saab, the manufacturer of the jet, also provides some interesting tidbits of information in their online product brochure for the Gripen E, which is one of the more modern versions of the jet. It dubs the Gripen E the game changer, noting that it has been designed to overcome any potential adversary. Saab says that newer versions of the Gripen have artificial intelligence or AI capabilities that have transformed the jet's cockpit. AI facilitates the creation of what Saab calls a wide area display that allows the pilot to see information that can aid in their decision-making. Through this display, the pilot can also select, launch, and even guide the weapons they fire as they coordinate with other members of their unit. The Gripen is also built to counter one of Russia's most potent weapons, electronic warfare, or EW. Gripen does real-time signal analysis and countermeasures management, as well as extensive electronic intelligence, ELINT, signal collection to vanquish any rival, Saab proclaims. In practice, this means that the Gripen can overcome most Russian attempts to interfere with its systems. It also has EW tools it can use for offense, which Saab says allow the Gripen to disrupt an enemy's capacity to perform. Refueling and rearming are also quick. The Gripen's design allows for both to be completed in less than 20 minutes. In a war where Russia is increasingly relying on missile and drone strikes, having an airframe that can head out, defend, reload, and then head out again is extremely valuable to Ukraine. But beyond all of this, the Gripen may end up being iconic for Ukraine for another reason. It's an example of what can be achieved when a country takes control of its own manufacturing. When Sweden conceptualized the Gripen, several other aerial platforms were available to be bought. The F-16 and French-made Mirage were among them. However, Sweden didn't want to be beholden to any other country when it came to operating its own aircraft, so it decided to go it alone with the Gripen. After achieving backing via state funding in the 1980s, Saab built the aircraft and then refined what they had, creating a jet that can stand toe-to-toe with any 4th or 4th+ generation fighter out there. Ukraine has experienced a similar journey in which it has increasingly gone its own way with weapons development, especially after a 2025 that has seen support from the US being inconsistent at best. The Gripen is a symbol of what a country can achieve when it goes its own way. Now it could be a major asset for Ukraine as it attempts to secure its sovereignty. And that brings us nicely to what Ukraine will actually be able to do with the Gripen once it arrives. We already know what the jet is capable of from a technical perspective, but how will Ukraine actually use it in the fight against Russia? The wealth of information a Gripen provides to its pilot offers us the first answer to that question. Military analyst Wes O'Donnell highlights just how intelligent the latest versions of the Gripen are, suggesting that the jets may even be strong enough to be F-35 killers in a March 2025 article. Where the Gripen stands apart from most other jets is in the sheer amount of information it offers up. It's not about having the fastest jet or the one with the most missiles anymore, though the Gripen is no slouch in those departments. As O'Donnell puts it, the side that sees the battlefield first, shares data the fastest, and makes decisions in real time has the advantage. In a world where milliseconds can mean the difference between victory and getting blown out of the sky, seamless data sharing is king. And that's where the Gripen comes in. The combination of detection capabilities, its integrated AI, and the information sharing we touched on earlier all mean that the Gripen is among the best fighter jets Ukraine stands to receive. When running defense, a Gripen is fast and agile enough to avoid drones and other projectiles en route to taking out missiles that represent major threats. It can also share what it sees with Ukraine's other defenses, making them more effective. Offensively, the Gripen is agile enough to avoid many types of air defense missiles, with its multi-role nature making it just as useful for striking ground targets as it is in confronting aerial ones. And if Ukraine ever decides to engage in dogfighting with Russia's jets, the Gripen will be a great choice for that particular task. Beyond this versatility, the Gripen offers something else that Ukraine really needs right now. It's cheap to use. More specifically, it costs about $4,000 per hour of flight, United 24 reports. That's around half the amount that it costs to keep an F-16 in the air for an hour, and every little helps when it comes to Ukraine's finances right now. The Atlantic Council says that Ukraine and Russia are locked in a war of economic attrition, as much as they are locked in an attritional battle on the ground. Including Western support, Ukraine's military expenditure amounts to about $100 billion a year, which is no less than 50% of Ukraine's GDP, with 30% coming from the Ukrainian budget in 2024, the Atlantic Council points out. Russia spent $170 billion during the same year, though the sum only equates to 8% of Russia's GDP. Responsible statecraft takes a doom and gloom view of Ukraine's economic situation, suggesting that the country is spending more than it can afford on its defense. Ukraine has been running an annual budget deficit of 22% above its GDP since Putin launched his invasion. In 2025 alone, Ukraine will have a budget shortfall of about $41.5 billion, as it's forced to pump more cash into its defense. Tax increases and military aid haven't been able to solve these problems. The war could end tomorrow, the outlet claims, and Ukraine might still run out of money by the end of 2026. Financially, Ukraine is in no small amount of peril. We're not suggesting that the Gripen is going to solve these problems. Saving about 4,000 per hour of flight time compared to an F-16 isn't a massive saving, but it's something. If Ukraine is able to save money on a few hundred hours of flight time during the war, that $4,000 saved per hour could turn into a fairly respectable sum. Not enough to save Ukraine's economy by a long shot, but every little helps when it comes to these sorts of financial issues. Coming back to practicalities, the Gripen is also a useful addition to Ukraine's fighter jet stockpiles because it's capable of taking off and landing on unconventional surfaces such as civilian highways. NATO even reported its pilots practicing these kind of maneuvers in 2024, and Ukraine will want to learn as much as it can about this capability. Having a jet that is versatile enough to not need to rely on an airbase for takeoff or landing could prove important when protecting the Gripen against Russia's airstrikes. Finally, the Gripen gives Ukraine more options. Again, it's all about versatility, as we highlighted when discussing the many potential loadouts Ukraine can utilize for this Swedish jet. The Gripen provides Ukraine with options, and now that the jet has finally been combat tested after Thailand used it earlier in 2025 against Cambodia during a border clash, Ukraine can at least feel confident that they're getting a jet that could prove effective against Russia. The Gripen isn't a game changer, but its arrival may be enough to give Ukraine the ability to create better air defenses and cause more damage to Putin's troops in occupied Ukraine.
Ukraine has made doing the impossible an art form during its war against Russia. The country was never meant to withstand the sheer might of Russia's initial invasion, but it did. Even with military aid, Ukraine's defenses should have collapsed due to Russia's attritional strategy. But they haven't, and thanks to drones, Ukraine takes out tanks, artillery, air defense systems, and even assets inside Russia itself, none of which Russia could ever have thought possible back in February 2022. And now Ukraine has done the impossible again. Ukraine has just obliterated a roughly $10 million Russian gunship. And here's the kicker: Ukraine's weapon of choice costs $500, and Russia never saw it coming. On September 29, Euromaidan Press reported that the commander of Ukraine's unmanned systems forces had taken to Telegram to unveil footage of a strike that should have been impossible. Ukraine's 1st Battalion of the Kyiv Vysot, also known as the Predators of the Heights, has pulled off the attack. That battalion is part of Ukraine's 59th Separate Assault Brigade, and their strike managed to take out a big Russian asset, an Mi-8 helicopter. So, how did Ukraine manage to pull this off using a $500 weapon? The answer is coming in a moment, but before that, it's worth taking a closer look at the Mi-8 to understand why this gunship was such a high-profile target for Ukraine. Though the Mi-8 is called a gunship, that's only part of what it does. The Czech Republic's Ministry of Defense and Armed Forces reveals that Russian Mi-8s are designed to be multi-purpose, jacks of all trades when they're on the battlefield. Designed in the classic Russian style, meaning they feature a 5-blade main rotor and a 3-blade tail rotor, the Mi-8 is one of the world's most extensively used military choppers. It's one of the increasingly rare examples of Russia getting a lot of things right with one of its aerial platforms. Right now, Mi-8s are flown in 49 countries because they offer a level of versatility that's rarely seen in a helicopter. The Mi-8's primary purpose is transporting personnel, with which it's aided by what the Czech ministry calls excellent navigation and information systems that enable safe day and night flights even under the very adverse weather conditions. Some versions of the chopper even have a special hold for VIPs, indicating that the Mi-8 is Russia's chopper of choice when it wants to move important people around the battlefield. Granted, it's a Soviet-era helicopter, like so much of the equipment that Russia is fielding against Ukraine. But unlike the ancient tanks and towed artillery, Mi-8s are far from obsolete. They have a cruise speed of around 200 kilometers or about 124 miles per hour, and they're capable of carrying 24 people or up to 4,000 kilograms of cargo. That amounts to over 8,800 pounds, suggesting that this is a helicopter that was designed to do some very heavy lifting. But hold on a second. The Mi-8 was called a gunship earlier, yet it seems like a cargo chopper. It's actually both. As Odin highlights in its profile of the Mi-8, There are several ways that this helicopter can do a lot of damage if Russia chooses to use it that way. The most obvious method is by using the people stashed on board. The Mi-8 has several windows installed in its interior cabin through which soldiers can fire any number of personal weapons from its sides. A hail of machine gun fire can meet anybody who tries to interfere with this chopper's operations. But truthfully, that's the least of a potential target's concerns. The Mi-8 also has several wing-mounted weapons, and it's these that give the chopper its reputation of being just as effective as a gunship as it is as a cargo helicopter. Depending on how Russia wants to use the Mi-8, it can be loaded with a pair of 7.62mm machine guns or one 12.7mm gun. If the Mi-8 is intended to deal with targets on the ground, it can be loaded with up to 6 AT-2X or AT-3 anti-tank guided missiles. If explosive firepower is the goal, Russia can load up to 6 57mm rocket pods, each capable of carrying 16 rockets for a total of 96. Or the Mi-8 can be loaded with a pair of 80mm pods capable of carrying 20 rockets apiece if it needs to hit a little harder. And speaking of hitting hard, the chopper is also capable of dropping bombs. Russia's 250 and 500 kilogram bombs can be loaded onto an Mi-8, so can a pair of 23mm gun pods. Coming back to the rockets, Odin adds that Russia has choices here as well. Heat, anti-armor, smoke, incendiary, and high explosive fragmentation rounds can all be fired from this chopper. The point here is that despite its age, the Mi-8 is still a formidable adversary. When Russia isn't using it to transport troops, it can be loaded with so many weapons that it poses a threat to a range of ground targets. It's not the perfect weapon, of course. Mi-8 isn't going to be winning a battle with a fighter jet anytime soon. But even if it was just its cargo carrying abilities alone that Ukraine had to worry about, this bulky chopper would still be worth taking out of the skies for good. Which leads right back to what was promised earlier, how Ukraine took out Russia's Mi-8 on September 29. The Kyiv Post provides the basics, reporting that Ukraine managed to take out this terrifying Russian gunship with a weapon that is made famous during its battle against Russia. Yes, it was a first-person view or FPV drone that destroyed Russia's Mi-8. And this isn't speculation. It's not a case where a missile did the dirty work and Ukraine is claiming it was a drone. Ukraine has receipts in the form of footage shared by the commander of Ukraine's unmanned systems forces mentioned earlier. That commander is named Robert Brovdy, though he goes by the nickname Madyar, and he shared the footage that proves Ukraine just took out a Russian gunship with a very cheap drone. Taking to Telegram, Madyar has shared 2 videos, the first of which shows the immediate aftermath of Ukraine's FPV drone strike on a chopper that Madyar initially thought was a Mi-28. That initial 30-second video appears to have been shot by another of Ukraine's drones, and it shows the Russian chopper exploding into a ball of flames after something hits it. Seeing what that something might be is difficult in the initial footage, as the Mi-8 turns into a smoking fireball before it hurtles to the ground after Ukraine's attack. So what, one might think? The video is impressive enough, but it's difficult to tell if Ukraine really used an FPV drone to take out Russia's Mi-8. Madyar must have agreed. In a second Telegram post, where Madyar corrected his initial post and confirmed that it was an Mi-8 that Ukraine took out, a full minute of footage shows a lot more what confirms how Ukraine carried out this strike. This time, the footage doesn't come from a different Ukrainian drone that's filming what happened to Russia's Mi-8. It comes from the drone that did the damage. Things are seen from the FPV drone's perspective as it hurtles through the air en route to its target. At about the 10-second mark, Russia's Mi-8 appears on the horizon. Within seconds, Ukraine's FPV drone is within touching distance. It pivots slightly to its right, allowing the drone to position itself right in the Mi-8's path. The gunship's pilot either didn't see the drone coming or was simply unable to react. It doesn't really matter. Ukraine's drone makes contact with the side of Russia's chopper and its screen goes blank. Detonation achieved, chopper down. The video then cuts back to the same footage shot from range that Madyar shared before. However, a little more is tacked onto the end of the 1-minute video. Another of Ukraine's drones arrives on the scene, allowing us to see the flaming wreckage of Russia's chopper on the ground. There can be no doubt at this point, Russia lost one of its most valuable helicopters thanks to a single Ukrainian FPV drone. That drone, Defense Blog says in its report on Ukraine's impossible strike, was a Shrike 10. Far from being the most impressive drone in Ukraine's ever-expanding arsenal of unmanned aerial vehicles, the Shrike 10 is so named because it's an FPV drone measuring just 10 inches that can be armed with a PG-7M warhead. While the drone itself may not be the first weapon one might think of for the job of taking out an Mi-8, that warhead packs enough of a punch to get the job done. It's a high-explosive anti-tank or heat rocket that's capable of destroying far heavier armor that's packed into the Mi-8. Ukraine repurposed this powerful rocket for the Shrike 10. September 29 proved just what it could do with an anti-tank rocket when taking on a gunship. Defense Blog adds that what Ukraine just pulled off is only the second confirmed instance of the country managing to take out an Mi-8 helicopter using an FPV drone. There are so few examples for a reason. FPV drones, which are remotely piloted using real-time video feeds, have become one of Ukraine's most effective tools for striking tanks, artillery, and logistic targets, Defense Blog says. However, using them against moving aerial targets remain extremely difficult due to high speeds, unpredictable flight paths, and limited engagement windows. That's evident in the footage described earlier. There are literal seconds between when Russia's Mi-8 appeared on the horizon and when Ukraine's drone scored its direct hit. The drone operator needed sharp eyes to spot the incoming Russian asset, and even sharper reflexes to get their drone into position so it could hit its target. This was a very rare strike, and it's not something that Ukraine can repeat all too often. But it managed it on September 29. And Ukraine did some serious damage with the strike. Beyond taking out the helicopter, Defense Blog reports, Ukraine also managed to kill some Russian personnel. The Mi-8's pilot wasn't one of them, apparently. Pro-Kremlin military bloggers have claimed that the Mi-8's entire crew was evacuated from the crash site and there were no casualties. That appears to have been a lie, at least according to Defense Blog. The outlet says that later reports indicate that the Russian gunship was carrying 5 people. 3 of those people are dead. The other 2 have sustained severe burns in the fireball that Ukraine's drone strike created and are now in critical condition. How has Russia reacted to all of this? It's tried to deny everything other than that Ukraine took out an Mi-8. The Voivoda broadcast Telegram channel shared the lie that all was well with the crew of the destroyed Mi-8. Everything's fine, the channel claimed. The infantry picked up the crew and evacuated them. Huge thanks to them for that. The channel added, and the Ukrainians screwed up with a type of helicopter. That was a legitimate error that has since been corrected. And as for the Mi-8's pilots, the pilots were great. They held the burning one down and landed it safely, the Voivoda broadcast says. Landed it safely? What's seen in Ukraine's footage doesn't seem like a safe landing. It looks like an Mi-8 hurtling to the ground while on fire. There isn't a landing to speak of, just a crash, and one that's likely killed or severely injured everybody on board. Mentioned earlier was that this isn't the first time that Ukraine has managed to take out Russian choppers while they're in flight. Back in August, the Kyiv Post reported that Ukraine managed to use some of its Darts FPV drones to score kills on both another Mi-8 and an Mi-28 during 2024. Again, video footage was released, and the results were devastating to Russia. The Mi-28 was carrying an assault team, according to the Kyiv Post. The team never made it to whatever attack it was supposed to be a part of in Kursk, which is where the strike happened. As for the Mi-8, Ukraine spotted it flying low and spent 10 minutes chasing it down. Ukraine's drone operators then predicted the gunship's flight path and sent a dart right into its tail. Perhaps the operators of the Shrike 10 did the same thing on September 29. However, there is a distinction between what Ukraine did in 2024 and what it achieved with its FPV drone in September. The Dart drones Ukraine used in its previous strike cost $1,000 each. That's still very low compared to the cost of a Mi-8. But in September, Ukraine halved its outlay, which means it doubled its return on investment. A Shrike 10 cost just $500 to build. An Mi-8 sets Russia back around $10 million. Ukraine's attack wasn't just as close to impossible as one can get, it was also extremely cost-effective. Ukraine managed to take out a gunship worth 20,000 times more than the weapon it used to conduct the strike. That's a fantastic return on investment in anybody's book, and it will make Ukraine's attack sting all the more for Russia. It can't console itself by thinking that Ukraine at least spent a missile that cost several $100,000 or even several $1 million to take out its Mi-8. Russia's chopper went down to about as basic an FPV drone as it's possible to find in the Ukraine war. A weapon that's been put together using barely any material decimated a chopper that was among the best that the Soviet Union ever made. That's not just painful for Russia, it's embarrassing. The Mi-8 can pack so much expensive firepower, yet all of it was useless against Ukraine's 10-inch drone. It's not even clear if this particular gunship had weapons. Even if it did, the pilot wouldn't have been able to fire them. Ukraine's drone was on the Mi-8 before Russia even realized what was happening. Russia paid the cost. If Defense Blog is right, it's not just a $10 million helicopter that Ukraine took out. Reports suggest there were 5 people on board, with 3 killed in action and 2 critically injured, though there's been no official confirmation yet. As callous as it may be to say, these are all expenses on top of the Mi-8 itself, for which Russia now has to account for, both monetarily and in terms of its attacks being weakened on the battlefield. And all of this leads to what this means for the Ukraine war. First, it's important to dial things back a little. As insanely impressive as this almost impossible strike was, it's not some sort of game changer in the war. While the exact location has not been disclosed, reports suggest the helicopter was downed in eastern Ukraine. So it's at least clear that Ukraine has taken out a troop transport that likely ferried Russia's soldiers around for assaults in a region that Putin covets. Beyond that, the destruction of a single Mi-8 likely isn't going to have too much of a direct impact on the Ukraine war. What it does show is that Russia is still incapable of dealing with the often ingenious and cost-effective techniques Ukraine uses to cause serious damage to its military. An outlay of $500 for a $10 million plus return is no small thing. Small and cheap threats lie at the heart of Ukraine's entire strategy against Russia, and Putin's troops still haven't come up with an answer for them. The simple fact is that expensive assets like helicopters shouldn't be getting taken down by drones, but they are. And Russia seems unable to do anything about it. The Economist highlighted this problem in a September 2024 article, where it examined the battle between Ukraine's drones and Russia's helicopters. It used the previously mentioned example of Ukraine using Dart FPV drones to take out a pair of Russian helicopters to make the point that this could, and perhaps should, be a tactic that Ukraine explores more. Of course, helicopter pilots have ways to protect themselves. The Economist said when discussing how Russia could solve the problem of losing multi-million-dollar pieces of equipment to cheap drones. Although the flares they use to distract heat-seeking missiles are useless against drones, attack craft can use their automatic cannon against them. If that fails, the pilot can use evasive maneuvers or a burst of speed to get away, although that might mean abandoning their mission. The thing is, the footage of the September 29 strike showed how little time Russia's Mi-8 pilot had to react. Burst of speed and onboard weapons aren't the answer. The latter in particular can't solve Russia's Ukrainian drone problem. None of the missiles and bombs that are part of a Mi-8's gunship loadout are much use against a $500 FPV drone. The chopper's machine guns could be that the chopper pilot needs fast reflexes to use those guns. And if Ukraine does lose a drone in an Mi-8 encounter, then so what? The drone costs $500. Another could be sent on its way in minutes, and another, and then another. An Mi-8 would have to destroy 20,000 of Ukraine's $500 drones before Ukraine would be forced to concede that the juice isn't worth the squeeze for a strike. That just isn't happening. Whenever Ukraine sends a drone to attack a helicopter, it basically has nothing to lose and everything to gain. A similar concept appeared during Ukraine's brilliant Operation Spiderweb. Though that operation had obvious cost in terms of the intelligence gathered to make it happen and the vehicles used to transport Ukraine's FPV drones to their required locations, the drones themselves were little quadcopter unmanned aerial vehicles. They were cheap and loaded with small bombs, and that was enough to take out some of Russia's most expensive bombers. As the Lowy Institute puts it, Ukraine's cheap robots extract a heavy price from Russia. And that's what was evident on September 29. This wasn't just Ukraine pulling off the impossible, it was Ukraine showing how asymmetric warfare conducted on a budget can be effective against a military that spends far more. Ukraine keeps coming up with new ways to hurt Russia. It's costing Russia millions, if not billions of dollars in the process. Perhaps that, more than anything, will end up being the key to Ukraine winning its fight against Russia. September 29 represented another $10 million down the drain in a war that the US claimed had cost Russia over $200 billion by December 2024, and will have cost many billions more since then. It's all money being extracted from Putin's depleting war chest, and that, more so than the physical act of losing an Mi-8 and several personnel, may be what hurts Russia the most. After his grand summer offensive fell flat, Russia's President Vladimir Putin is about to enter his winter nightmare. Through a series of precise, calculated strikes, Ukraine has obliterated Russia's last hope of maintaining its war effort and its most important resource, fuel. Shortages are being reported far and wide across the nation, prices are rising, and some stations have even imposed strict limits on how much gas each customer can buy at a time. The Russian population is increasingly feeling the effects of the war in their everyday lives. It's an unsustainable situation, and one that even Putin will struggle to talk his way out of. Reports on the scale of these shortages and strikes differ depending on the source, but the overall trend is clear. And it's all thanks to Ukraine's remarkable long-term strategy, which has consisted of identifying the most important high-value targets both in occupied territories and within Russia itself, and taking them out with expert precision. While Russia was busy bombing hospitals and sending record-setting swarms of drones towards Kyiv and other towns and cities across Ukraine, Ukrainian forces followed a completely different tactic. They weren't interested in killing Russian civilians or blowing up residential buildings. They wanted to hit the Kremlin where it hurt the most, taking out the pieces of infrastructure that were most vital to keeping the country's war machine up and running. And what does any machine need to run? Fuel. So, time and time again, reports have surfaced of Ukrainian drones or missiles hitting Russian oil refineries, as well as fuel storage facilities, pipelines and depots. In the last couple of months alone, explosions have rung out at numerous locations all over Russia, including some that are literally hundreds of miles beyond the borders of Ukraine. Places like Volgograd, Saratov, Ryazan and Krasnodar have all felt the force and fury of Ukraine's drones raining down upon them, setting millions of tons of oil ablaze in an instant and dramatically depleting the Kremlin's fuel supplies. And even though Russians are forbidden from sharing images or footage of drone strikes online, videos have still started to spread across Telegram channels and other social media networks, showing fires, explosions, and thick clouds of smoke filling the skies above these refineries. The effects weren't felt straight away, as Russia is, after all, one of the world's biggest oil producers. At peak capacity, this country can make over 11 million barrels of oil in a single day, so one damaged refinery here and there isn't enough to have any sort of immediate impact. Indeed, Russia, and its leader, Vladimir Putin, has long relied on its gigantic fuel industry to exert power and influence around the world. The industry has also, in more ways than one, paid for the war in Ukraine. Even when Western nations imposed sanctions on Russia and slashed their investments in Russian energy, the Kremlin simply started selling more of its oil and other resources to other nations like India and China, relying on these Asian investors to prop up its economy and allow it to keep spending exorbitant amounts on the war. But as time went by and Ukraine struck more and more of these important fuel-related targets, cracks began to show in the once impenetrable Russian oil industry. Back in July, for example, Russia imposed a gasoline exports ban for oil producers. At the time, officials stated that this was simply because of high levels of demand associated with summer travel and grain harvesting, but many analysts believe there was a direct link with the increasingly frequent Ukrainian attacks on oil refineries. Soon after, reports of delays and disruptions began to emerge. There were stories of lines several miles long, made up of motorists queuing up to fill their vehicles with gasoline. Meanwhile, Russia-appointed leaders of occupied Ukrainian territories began to openly admit to fuel shortages. Yevgeny Belitsky, for example, the Russia-backed governor of Zaporizhia, reported that high levels of demand, combined with oil refinery repair works and the threat of further Ukrainian strikes, was causing disruption. In the Zaporizhia region, the fuel shortage is further complicated by logistic issues and the threat of enemy attacks on fuel trains. The Kremlin's leader in Crimea too, Sergei Aksenov, acknowledged the issues. "This is an objective situation which could last up to a month or more," he said, going on to admit that the problem would likely persist for as long as the war continued. The very fact that officials have been speaking out about this issue is a big deal, since Russian officials generally tend to say whatever the Kremlin wants them to say and often avoid openly admitting when things are going wrong. This was pointed out by the American non-profit research group and advocacy think tank, the Institute for the Study of War, ISW, which wrote in its Russian Offensive Campaign Assessment for September 11. Russian state media is acknowledging the growing gasoline shortages in Russia, but is downplaying the role that Ukraine's deep strike campaign is playing in generating these shortages. The Russian Independent Fuel Union, an association of gas station owners, stated in an interview with Russian state newspaper Izvestia on September 10 that over 10 Russian federal subjects are experiencing fuel shortages, including Ryazan, Nizhny Novgorod, Saratov and Rostov Oblasts, far eastern regions and occupied Crimea, and that fuel shortages are also reaching central regions such as Nizhny Novgorod Oblast. Russian State Duma Anti-Monopoly Committee Expert Council member Dmitry Tortev told Izvestia that local fuel shortages are becoming widespread in Russia. Russia Independent Fuel Union representatives stated that many gas stations have not received refinery deliveries for several weeks, forcing some gas stations to shut down. While Russian officials have generally preferred to blame fuel problems on things like tourism and the farming sector, the truth of the matter is clear to see. Ukraine's drone and missile strikes have absolutely played a huge part in causing these shortages, as the ISW notes. ISW continues to assess that Ukraine's strike campaign against Ukrainian energy infrastructure is impacting Russia's domestic gasoline market, exacerbating shortages and causing price spikes that will likely push inflation upwards and create further macroeconomic instability in Russia. It's noteworthy that Russian state media is more openly discussing gasoline shortages, as it suggests that the issue is beginning to permeate into more mainstream Russian society. This is not the kind of crisis that's going to go away or get better overnight. In fact, it's getting worse at a rapid rate, and people all over Russia are feeling the effects day in and day out. The shortages are spreading to additional regions, fuel stations are being forced to close, and certain fuel types are becoming almost impossible to find. As noted by open source intelligence analyst Visioner on X, Russia is facing a severe fuel crisis after Ukrainian UAV strikes on refineries. Gasoline shortages have already spread to more than 20 regions. While the shortage was previously recorded in the Far East and Crimea, in September it spread to 10 more regions: Ryazan, Nizhny Novgorod, Saratov, Samara, Ulyanovsk, Penza, Rostov and Astrakhan regions, as well as Kalmykia and Tatarstan. Some refineries have not supplied 92 and 95 octane gasoline for several weeks, and some are completely closed or operating irregularly. Reports also emerged in mid-September of some Russians being forced to turn to black market suppliers and pay astonishing prices of up to $9 a gallon to get the gas they need, with some opting to stock up before the rates went even higher. It's worth noting that in Russia, the median salary is just $1,200 a month, and many people live on far less than that. For many, the black market rates are far too high, but even the official gas station prices are also becoming increasingly out of reach for average people. On September 10, according to Russia's own official statistics, average fuel prices were around 64.01 rubles per litre, as reported by journalist and documentary filmmaker Tim White. Even Russia's official statistics, which are massaged to acceptable levels, begin to show fuel problems. The current average pump price is 64.01 rubles per litre, up to 2.6% in a month, equates to over 30% if continued throughout the year. The real price is likely 66 rubles per litre. That worked out around $2.66 per gallon. Now, as shown in images shared by the X account Jay in Kyiv, that figure has almost doubled in certain regions. The Kremlin's fuel crisis is now becoming unmanageable, as the few stations that still have gasoline are now charging the equivalent price of $4.52 per gallon. It now costs half the median monthly salary to fill a tank. And that's not all. In more cities and more regions, the problems are spilling over, and gas station managers clearly have no idea how to cope or what to do, with many resorting to bizarre strategies in a bid to try and contain the crisis. Some have imposed strict limits on how much fuel each person can buy, as reported by open source intelligence analyst Special Kherson Cat. The fuel crisis is rapidly spreading to more and more cities and regions across Russia. Every day, one can find not just one, not a few, but dozens of reports that the fuel crisis is spreading or worsening. At many gas stations where fuel is still available, gasoline is being dispensed in quantities of either no more than 10 to 20 litres per vehicle or only for specialised vehicles. This is the clearest indication that the attacks on Russia's fuel infrastructure are working and should continue and intensify. Other gas station chains, meanwhile, have tried alternative tactics. The HTK chain, for example, decided to stop selling 92 gas to regular customers, making it available to loyal fuel card owners only. Fuel shortages in Russia keep deepening. In Caucasia, the entire network of HTK gas stations has stopped selling AI-92 to regular customers, only allowing purchases with fuel cards. In Crimea, about half the stations are closed. The huge Lukoil chain, meanwhile, decided to go in the opposite direction, announcing the cancellation of fuel cards in one region and banning customers from buying filling up cans with gasoline. In short, it's absolute chaos in many Russian regions, as well as occupied territories like Crimea, where one local activist revealed, "In parts of Crimea, the situation is critical. Many stations have closed completely. At the ones still open, there's no gasoline, only diesel and natural gas. With the planting season beginning, this threatens to derail it. Local authorities have introduced a ration system. Only government vehicles are allowed to refuel." Meanwhile, in the Nizhny Novgorod region, home to one of Russia's largest cities, school buses have been unable to pick up children due to the lack of gasoline at local stations, even though regional authorities continue to boldly claim there are no major issues. Even in the far east of Russia, as far from the conflict in Ukraine as possible, the effects are being felt. A regional governor, Alexei Maslov, recently had to respond to concerns among the population, promising them that more fuel was on the way. "We see and understand your concerns about queues at gas stations and difficulties with refueling. There is no physical shortage of fuel in the Vanino district, and queues at gas stations are caused by repair work at refineries and rush demand. In the coming days, new batches of gasoline will arrive, which will meet the needs of the population until October 12. Maslov also urged people to stop panic buying, as this would only make the problem worse. The purchase of fuel by motorists for future use, this has created an artificial shortage. When some gas stations run out of gasoline faster, the new batches are delivered and kilometers of queues form at others. The most important thing we can do now altogether is to stop panic buying." Unfortunately, many people are unlikely to heed Maslov's call. With the situation becoming increasingly desperate and many Russians fearful that the shortages will only worsen in the weeks to come, panic buying is likely to continue. The more that happens, the worse the crisis will become, and black market sellers will become even bolder, pushing their prices higher to take advantage of people's desperation. For so long, a large percentage of the Russian population hadn't really felt the effect of their country's war with Ukraine. For many, it was just some sort of distant conflict, a so-called special military operation that should be all taken care of quite quickly and wouldn't impact their own lives in any notable way. But as the war has gone on, month by month, year by year, it has slowly but surely come closer to home, with everyday Russians feeling the impact bit by bit. Obviously, they don't feel it anywhere near as much as Ukrainians, who have seen their homes blown to bits and their towns and cities reduced to rubble. But Russian people are at last starting to see the truth and experience the consequences of the Kremlin's aggression. And everything they're experiencing is negative. Their lives have not improved in any way because of the invasion of Ukraine. They've only become worse, and it's not just because of the gas crisis. Prices of food and other everyday essentials have also skyrocketed across the country in recent times. The Russian people feel increasingly isolated and cut off from the rest of the world, and the government is controlling almost every aspect of their lives, restricting everything from their freedom of speech to the websites they're able to access on their phones and computers. That's not to mention the ever-increasing number of Russian families that have also been forced to mourn the loss of their loved ones in this needless war, with so many husbands, brothers, fathers and sons sent off to Ukraine, never to return. Russian media and government officials have done everything in their power to gloss over these issues, hide the harsh realities of the war, and paint a false picture of the conflict, telling the population that everything is going well. But they can't hide it any longer, and even staunch Russian nationalists and hardened military bloggers are starting to see behind the curtain. As revealed by military history author Chris_O on X, many of these bloggers are starting to complain. They no longer believe the Kremlin's official accounts or its bold statements about shooting down every single Ukrainian drone that enters Russian airspace. Many are breaking the rules, sharing images and videos of Ukrainian drones online and asking questions about how these attacks are being allowed to happen again and again with such regularity and efficacy. One blog, entitled 2 Majors, has called for the creation of a single unified agency to counter Ukrainian drones and urged those in charge to provide the necessary equipment and assistance to bring them down, stating, Currently, no one is held accountable and adequate measures will not be developed. We urge our esteemed capitalists to consider the need for somewhat more assistance to the Russian army, at least in terms of equipping the mobile fire teams guarding the skies around the oil refineries. Some bloggers have come up with their own conspiracy theories about how and why these attacks are occurring. Some say that gas industry officials are literally allowing their refineries to be blown up as some sort of bizarre scheme to push fuel prices higher. Others, meanwhile, have suggested a more realistic theory, arguing that Russia is quite simply running low on the surface-to-air missiles needed to bring Ukrainian drones down. And without adequate defenses in place, it just isn't possible to stop these attacks. For Ukraine, meanwhile, this is all about the end result of a long and hard-fought campaign that has demanded an extraordinary amount of hard work, intelligence, patience, and precision. Analysts suggest that drone and missile strikes have effectively taken out a quarter of Russia's entire oil refining capacities, as revealed by Igor Susko on X. Russian news confirmed 25% of oil refining capacity is offline from Ukrainian strikes. 27,000 tons of surplus crude oil daily with nowhere to go. 50% of gas stations in occupied Crimea out of business. 14.2% of gas stations shuttered in the southern federal district. What's more, despite having a strong energy industry, Russia lacks storage capacity for its excess crude oil. This issue has been compounded yet again by Ukrainian forces, who have repeatedly targeted oil tanks and other storage locations, leaving Russia with fewer and fewer places to put oil while it carries out repairs at its refineries, pipelines, and other important locations. That in turn means that crude oil production has to be reduced even further, because there's simply nowhere for the oil to go. On top of all of this, Ukraine has also started hitting natural gas facilities, adding further pressure on Russia's energy sector. On September 25, the Ukrainian commander-in-chief, Oleksandr Syrsky, summed up the situation. The capabilities of the enemy's military-industrial complex have been significantly reduced. We can see this on the battlefield. This is a fuel crisis in Russia. And it's a crisis that's only going to get worse, because Ukraine isn't slowing down or easing up on its attacks. Its drone units, like the Birds of Magyar, will continue to find any remaining Russian refineries in range and hit them as hard as they can. Each strike will diminish not just Russia's oil production capabilities, but also any hope it had left of winning this war. Because without fuel, even the mightiest armies are incapable of claiming land or conquering enemy territory. Without fuel, the Russian economy will continue to spiral. And without fuel, people all over the country will see their lives get worse. And when they look for someone to blame, their eyes will inevitably turn to their supposedly great leader, Vladimir Putin himself. Now, learn more about Putin's ever-growing list of worries and fears in our recent video, looking at how Russia's colossal losses in Ukraine and rising levels of domestic instability are piling pressure on the Russian president. Or check out our breakdown of the current situation in Pokrovsk, one of the most important strategic locations along the front lines of Donetsk, where Russian soldiers are dropping like flies. And finally, be sure to subscribe to our channel too for more updates, insights, and detailed breakdowns of the Russia-Ukraine war and other important conflicts around the world.